He's wearing a Bluetooth. I can't
David
let
is
him
in
in.
his car on the phone.
No, he's walking. I
Oh,
can't let
okay.
him in. Oh, you have to let him. No.
11 o'clock.
He's still on the phone. He
Oh,
doesn't
okay,
monitor me.
okay.
All right, we,
Wait for Ned Cohn. That's what a while ago. That's what it was. Where's one hour? At the ledger, it goes out one.
Maybe it's just a bad company, you guys use.
we get to start out with well, we can say the bracha for Torah study, which is Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Next week, by the way, is Shavuot in the evening. So there's Torah study, but in theory with more people. Bethel from Hillsborough will join us, and we'll do a program where the clergy from each place will teach sort of in succession. There'll be a couple of classes going at once, and you can choose who you want to learn with. And then we'll have cheesecake, and then we'll do the evening service, the Mariv, sort of together, and there Bethel's coming here for that.
At 7?
That's at 7 o'clock next week, but then going a little later than we normally would because it's a holiday. This is our nice arrangement, right? So we do slichot, the slichot before high holidays, we do together there at Bethel because on Saturday night, and we do Shavuot here because that's a holiday and I don't ride on the holiday, so they nicely come to us for one, and the one that I can drive to them for, we go to them. So like we try and get along. Yes, Rabbi Gluck. I just want to follow up on one thing from last week. I'd mentioned to Stephen asked for like really curse of Ham, like this sort of whole like slavery. It didn't sit well with you, like the I looked just briefly a moment ago in this sort of like 60s style Bible atlas, and you can see like where do Noah's sons go to? Like they go, Japheth is up here, like Europe, Asia Minor. Shem are the Semites, Middle Eastern peoples, and Ham is Egypt and surrounding areas. So like that's where they the reference is that I said last week that I can give to you, Stephen, was in 1861. Morris Raphael, the rabbi of the Spanish Portuguese synagogue on the Upper West Side of New York, then as now, like one of the prominent pulpits in the country. January 1861, on the eve of the Civil War, gives a sermon known as the Bible View of Slavery, where he says that the God in His holy word that that even the Constitution must be set aside for a higher law, and that is to recognize that when Noah says, "Cursed be Canaan, lowliest of slaves shall he be to his brothers," that's referring to everyone descended from him, and that would include Ham's son Cush. That's Genesis 10 is where we get today. His son Cush. Cush is is Nubia, i.e. Sudan, and thus a stand-in for all of sub-Saharan Africa in general. Because that curse remains in full force to this day, 1861, thousands of years later, the unfortunate Negro is indeed the meanest of slaves. While you and I may regret that perpetual Black slavery emerged from beneath the waters of the wrath, i.e. from Noah's flood, it was backed by the authority of Scripture, and so there's no arguing with it. So that's where we'll land today, not with the defense of slavery, God forbid, but just that's the line that comes out. Chapter 10 is linking Cush, because Cush we know from elsewhere in the Tanakh that Cush is south of Africa, further up the Nile. I always get the direction wrong. Yeah, further up the Nile. So that in fact we know that from another little racially charged scene in the Torah much later on. In the Parsha, not long from now, maybe 2 weeks from now, Moses' sister Miriam and brother Aaron will complain about Moses' wife, and I'll only say because she's a Cushite, and Cush is Sudan. It's sub-Saharan Africa. So it doesn't say why they're complaining. It just says they're complaining about his Cushite wife, which is like saying they're complaining about his about his black wife. So we don't know, but
Which is the name of the son, though, is not the geographic area.
right, but the geographic area is Cush. You see, like so yeah, the son of Canaan, and then the geographic area is known as Cush, and they're known as Cushite. So so we don't know what they're complaining about, but there's a chance that they're just complaining that he married a black woman. And God, of course, punishes Miriam for her complaining and says Moses gets to do what Moses wants to do. So that's a possibility. It's not the only possibility. Rashi gives a different explanation, as Rashi often does, but yeah, Rashi's explanation is that because when we meet Zipporah, Moses' wife, she's a Midianite. She's the daughter of the Midianite priest, right? Jethro's daughter. And Midian is like in the Sinai. So he's marrying the daughter of a pagan priest, but she's Midianite. Then later on, Miriam complains and Aaron complain about his Cushite wife. So does Moses have two wives? Is she? So we don't know. Is it one wife or is it two wives? Rashi's explanation, the logical thing would be is two wives, because one's Midianite and one must be Cushite. And we just didn't know about her until now. Or Rashi says, again, with all controls on Rashi didn't have a obligation to be politically correct. Rashi says that it's the same wife, one wife, but she's so beautiful that she's as undoubtedly purely beautiful as a woman from Cush would be purely undoubtedly black. That's his explanation. Just as a Cushite woman is perfectly black, Moses' wife is perfectly beautiful, and so she calls her Cushite, and that's how Rashi saves Moses for monogamy, as it were. So the logical explanation would be that it's one. Rashi's living about 1,000 years ago in France and Germany, and he's just pulling what he thinks are the greatest hits of the rabbinic midrash from about 1,000 years before him. So Rashi's skill is sort of just like is picking out. He doesn't make anything up so much on his own. He just chooses what he thinks are the best explanations. A bit, yeah. Right. Oh yeah. Well, I'm saying that the plain sense of the text is he married a black woman. There's right. That's the easiest. That's the easiest read is he's got two wives. One's Midianite. One's Cushite. One would have been a Cushite. Yeah. So that. Anyway, that's where Cush is. That's the son that's there, and there's again, this is in the not politically correct category. So again, said with love and respect towards everyone. In rabbinical school, there's a joke. Like when people would struggle to get a job, you'd say that, don't worry about it. Even Moses couldn't get hired today. Before any hiring committee, he'd go to the suburban synagogue and they'd be like, he's too old, he has a black wife and he stutters. So again, the point being, Moses, perfect. and wouldn't, and like some community be like, oh, is that okay? Is he okay? But yeah. That's cool. Oh, yeah. Polygamy isn't the issue for that. I mean, the isn't much of an issue, right? The well, right. So that's the question. Are they complaining about that or not? So notice how Rashi actually says no, they wouldn't. That's not an issue. Anyway, that's there. That's where Cush is. Let's fast forward. The chapter 10. Chapter 10, I'm going to fast forward through just to get to chapter 11. I'm going to read it, but just so that we can say we've read every word. But the right, exactly, right. So chapter 10 is, and these are the records of Noah's son, Shem, Ham, and Yafat. And the children born to them after the flood. Yafat's children were Gomer and Magog. Magog will be famous later as is the name of the end times war, will be named after his descendants. And Madai and Yawan and Tuval and Meshach and Tiras. And Gomer's children were Ashkenaz. That obviously you see where these guys are going. Ashkenaz is famously Germany, right? Where Ashkenazim. And Rifath and Tomargath and Yawan's children were Elisha and Tarshish along the sea. Kittim and Dodadim. The islands of the nations of their lands were dispersed out from these, each by its language, by their families, with their nations, i.e. along the Mediterranean rim. And Ham's children were Cush, what we're talking about, and Egypt, and Put, and Canaan. And Cush's children were Sheba and Havi. Sheba is like Sheba, the like the Queen of Sheba. Yeah, the Queen of Sheba comes from there. And Havilah and Sabat and Ramah. And Sabita and Ramah's children were Sheba and Dedan, and Cush fathered Nimrod. He began being a man of power on earth. He was a powerful hunter before Adonai. On account of this, it is said, powerful hunter before Adonai is Nimrod. Now, this is the only like little interjection in this line. We just get a bunch of names, and suddenly Nimrod gets this little story told about him.
Is this where the phrase comes from? Don't be a Nimrod?
I don't know. Nimrod was a powerful hunter. So I don't know. I don't know that anyone knew that until besides me. Is that like a thing, right? Yeah. So Nimrod. So Nimrod is in this. There are mountains of midrashim written about him. There are hundreds of pages of stories about this guy because they just like when the Bible drops a hint like this. Oh yeah, that guy super powerful and doesn't say anything else. Like the sages go nuts with the adventures of Nimrod. So there are lots of stories of Nimrod. He was a great king. He persecuted Abraham. It's also a name in modern Hebrew. To the sages, he's the ultimate symbol of pagan strength and evil. To the early Zionists who were looking to throw off rabbinic Judaism and embrace a land-based, earthy sort of strength. So Israelis, especially in the early years of the States, would name their sons Nimrod. And you still find guys named Nimrod, even though he's like to the rabbis, he's a bad guy. But they're like, oh, here's somebody like in the biblical tradition who's strong, and our ethos is that of strength and not of pale people hunched over books. So Nimrod, you still meet Israel's name Nimrod. They would have known who he was. We don't. Like everyone presumably like back when this was written, we're like, oh yeah, Nimrod, I know all those stories. And they were like Paul Bunyan stories, but we don't know. Then at the beginning of his kingdom was Babylon. You know where that is, what's now Iraq, and Eretz and Akkad, also in that same region, Syria, Iraq. And Kalna in the land of Shinar. Shinar is another name for Babylon, another name for Mesopotamia, what's now Iraq. Ashur came out of that land and built Nineveh. Again, that's just south of Baghdad today. And Rehovot Ir and Kala and Rezin begat Nineveh and Kala. It is the big city. People knew this. And Egypt fathered Ludim and Nim and Lahabim and Nephilim and Perusim and Kalusim, from which the Philistines came out. And Kaphtorim, Philistines came from like the Mediterranean and settled on what's now the coast of Israel. And Canaan fathered Sidon, that's just this in South Lebanon now, his firstborn, and Het, and the Jebusites, that the Jebusites were settled in where Jerusalem now is, and the Amorite, and the Girgashite, and the Hivite, and the Arakite, and the Sinite, and the Aravite, and the Zemite. These are all places in the biblical land of Israel, and the Hamathites. And later the families of the Canaanites were dispersed. And the Canaanite border was from Sidon, as you come up Gerar, up to Gaza, as you come to Sodom and Gomorrah, and Admah and Zebulun, up to Lasha. These are Ham's children by their families, by their languages, and their lands within their nations. This is explaining how the world gets populated. After Noah, there's just you got 10 people on a boat, 7 people on a boat. And this is sort of explaining how everyone spread out and fulfilled God's blessing. God said after the flood, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and populate it. So what are they doing? They're being fruitful and multiplying and filling the earth and populating it. This is like the known earth to them, which is what we would call the Middle East and North Africa, is basically where they are. And sort of Asia Minor, Turkey, Greece. Verse 21, children were born to Shem, him as well, father of all of Aver's children. Aver is going to be the ancestor of eventually Israel. Ever from Ever, meaning like the other side of other. Like it seems probably means the other side of the river, the other side of Mesopotamia. Shem, right? That's why people call us Shemites, Semites. When Semites refers to really a language group coming out of Shem, biblically, just sort of like linked. So most people in that region, in what we would call the Middle East, Arabs, Israel being like the most prominent, were thought of them as Shemites, Semites. In 19th century Germany, when religious anti-Semitism began to fade because people weren't as intensely Christian anymore, so you didn't hate Jews as Christ killers, but you did hate Jews as being racially inferior, there and thus scientific, right? So they didn't believe in like the old school religious anti-Judaism because they weren't that religious. But science proves to their minds, not in fact, but to their minds that there are superior races and inferior races, and the Shemites are inferior to these Aryan types. So I'm not anti-Jewish. I don't hate Jews because they killed Christ, because I'm not into that whole religion thing. But I am a man of science, and I'm an anti-Semite, meaning I just don't like people of inferior racial stock. It's just scientific biology. That's where anti-Semitism comes from as a phrase, right? Because they dropped religious anti-Judaism and tried to make it scientific, racial anti-Semitism, which is why when you meet the Nazis later on, you can't convert out of Judaism, right? To the church, you could convert out, or you could, in Islamic countries, you could convert out and become Muslim and solve your Jewish problem for the most part. To the Nazis, you couldn't. Why not? Because you were racially inferior. It was in your biology. It's scientific. That's where, so anti-Semitism incredibly comes from an anti-Semite who wanted to give his anti-Judaism, give it a scientific sounding name. Yeah. Pardon me? I think so. Aryan isn't a name here. That's sort of like their thing, but I'm not up to speed on enough Nazi pseudoscience to know I don't get the whole Aryan thing. I mean, not just sort of like the obvious part of it, but it's from India, right?
Originally, the Nazis converted into this northern.
Right. Right. So that stuff is all a little fuzzy for me. The part that I know is what I just said, which is that the Semite comes from this Shem, but anti-Semite was just an attempt to give your bigotry a scientific sounding name.
Raised culture. They're curious if there are any of these groups in the Bible who went to Iran because they were different.
Yes. Yeah, that's some of these, in that early group, it's still, I think, Shem, like Elam, like, because all of these names get confusing to me, but yeah, the borders of their world are sort of from Persia to Egypt, and then sort of like Greece, Macedonia. Like that's like the circle of like what their universe is. Yeah. Anyway, 22. Shem's children were Elam and Ashur and Arpachshad and Lud and Aram. And Aram's children were Uz and Hul and Gether and Mash. And like this is again like people would like know these things, be like, oh, they would create links in their heads and they would know how everyone came together. And Arpachshad fathered Shelah, and Shelah fathered Eber, and 2 sons were born to Eber. One was Peleg, because his days on the earth were divided. Peleg meaning division. And his brother's name was Yoktan. And Joktan fathered Almod and Shelaphas and Hazar Mavet and Jerah, and Hadram and Uzal and Dilka and Ovel and Abimah and Sheba and Ophir and Havel and Jovam. And all these are Joktan's children. And their home was from Mesha, and he came to Shafir in the mountains of the east. These are Shem's children by their families, by their languages, their lands, by their nations. Subtract Nimrod from this, by the way, and you have 70 nations. 70 is the biblical number of peoples on the earth. They'll say there's 70 nations on the earth, and you know, there's 70 here. 70 children of Israel go down to Egypt. So 70 is sort of like a representative number. 32, these are the families of Noah's children by their records to their nations, and the nations were dispersed from these in the earth after the flood. That's chapter 10. That they would have understood as like where nations live and how nations came to be. This then is the other key story, chapter 11, an etiological story. Etiology is again like our fancy word explaining how things came to be. The story like does a few things, but one of the things that it explains, if everyone came from Noah, why do we all speak different languages? Answer, chapter 11. Vayhi. This is 10 verses that pack a lot into it. And it was, all the earth was one language and the same words. And when they were traveling from the east, and they found a valley in the land of Shinar and lived there. And they said to one another, come on, let's make bricks and fire them. Literally, let's brick bricks and burn. And they had brick for stone, and they had bitumen for mortar. And they said, come on, let's build ourselves a city and a tower, and its top will be in the skies and the heavens, and we'll make ourselves a name, or else we'll be scattered over the face of all the earth. And Adonai went down to see the city and the tower the children of humankind had built. Adonai said, here they're one people and they have one language, and this is what they've begun to do. Now nothing that they'll scheme to do will be precluded from them. Come on, let's go down and babble their language so they won't understand another's language. Adonai scattered them from there over the face of all the earth. They stopped building the city. On account of this, its name was called Babylon, because Adonai babbled the language of all the earth there, and Adonai scattered them from there over the face of all the earth.
Why would you want them to speak a different language?
Right, so this story, by the way, we'll point out again, it's super short, beginning to end. 2, it's really cryptic because it raises more questions than it answers. Why? Like the most basic thing you'd expect from the story, which is some level of clarity. Good question. Why does God want them to have their languages babbled, to have their language, to speak different languages?
7. Come with us.
Right.
Angels.
Right. So again, this is another instance of that us. Like we had in chapter 2, let us make man in our own image, and every so often we've had this us, and again,
Is it Lilith?
so Lilith, Lilith would have been in the garden. She Lilith is, when we talk about Rashi, We can find Lilith and Rashi. We can't find Lilith and like the. If you look in the Midrash, Lilith before, yeah,
Lilith was last week.
Doesn't she exist?
she's in the Midrash. Yeah, she's not in the text. She's in the Midrash. The so either the it's Adam's first wife, maybe like before Eve, or
She's a strong woman in the Bible, but they don't talk about her much.
but she's not in the Bible. She's in the Midrash, but yes.
That was that. She
takes on a jealous demonic characters. Some sects in Judaism, SECTS, still will put what's the word I'm looking for? Charms and begins with an A, like charms and things like this in like a baby's crib to ward off Lilith. Amulets. Amulets to ward off Lilith, who in some like streams of the Jewish tradition sort of has negative designs on babies. Yeah, red strings on babies, things like this. Yeah, not recommended by my sister-in-law works for DCP&P. Right. So Jews, Ashkenazim and Sephardim, like have like multiple amulets and things like that, and things. A lot of them are to ward off Lilith or other things. When Asher and Samuel were born in Israel, in Jerusalem, and any number of the little bassinets, little clear plastic bassinets in the neonatal room at Hadassah Ein Kerem were loaded with amulets and charms and chamsas and red strings. I didn't see any knives. Yes, it's all of a piece. This is when you speak of like the birth, when one speaks of the birth of conservative Judaism, like part of the drive was to reduce the number of amulets that people were using. We'll put it that way. So anyway, back to enough religion, back to the Torah. Why? So, but good question. Why? Like, sort of like, why does God want to do this? And it's not like, it's not super obvious. It seems like there's something like that there's a sense which isn't overly obvious from the text, like what's so terrible, right? That there's that they're doing something terribly wrong, that when people get together, that they're going to have some sort of like stupid project, and that God wants to break that up.
Was it maybe God?
I saw it a little differently in that, you said earlier that God wanted people to populate the world. And it basically says the Lord scattered them from there over the earth. So in order to encourage people to scatter, if they don't have the same language, that would be in the sense of kind of breaking the pride of the groups.
Right. Well, there are a few things going on, like right. So God wants them to be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. Like that's the blessing. Again, not a curse, but a blessing. And chapter 10, that long list of names, seems to have been explaining that, right? So this, God does scatter them. They're already in the process of doing it. And there's a punishment fits the crime, whatever the crime is, which again, isn't entirely clear. Notice that their thing is, come on, let's build ourselves a city and a tower, and on top will be in the heavens, and we'll make ourselves a name, or else we'll be scattered over the face of all the earth. So they say, let's do this, or else we'll be scattered over the face of the earth. And guess what? When they do it, they get scattered over the face of the earth, and the same words are used, right? Like God in verse 7 begins the same, Hava, come on, let's go down. Like they say, come on, let's build up. And God says, come on, let's go down. And then at the end, just like they say, we want to be scattered over the face of the earth, God scatters them over the face of the earth. It's a clear structure of a punishment fitting the crime, whatever the crime is. They were, though here, notice how they're all like, again, like the beginning, they Kol ha'aretz safa achad, d'varim achadim. It's all the earth was one language and the same words. That's the other possible clue. Because if they're using the same language, then what does it mean then to say, and the same words? Right?
But it might mean something different in London.
Right. Oh, that. If I order chips here, I'm getting a bag of crisps. And in London, I got, right, could be that. The same words.
And it,
If there's one language and one speech, it could be whatever they were plotting, whatever their motives were. Like that.
Right. One language, one speech, one language, same words.
Maybe
That was-
that's something to do with human nature versus kind of divine nature.
It
That
could be
if you
some.
leave people to themselves, they're gonna do the minimal amount that they can collect in one building and build a tower in the sky, they'll do that. And live with one minimal set of words,
Right. I mean,
where he wanted them spread out and dispersed and to let the earth flourish.
could be. I sometimes think that one language means one language, and the same words means that almost that people are all on the same page, and maybe that's not good. Like that when groupthink, I guess maybe might be like what I'm saying, like when people are all think the same way, and there's no diverse that. There's a chance that this is a pro-diversity story, right? That when everyone's talking the same and speaking the same way and doing the same things, that's not what God wants. That's anti this. And what God wants is for us to, when you have different language, famous linguists are better at this than I am, like sort of when you have a different language, you think differently, right? Like sort of like the grammatical structures lead you.
We all speak the same language, and our words all mean the same thing. But if I'm exposed to certain things, and Bonnie's exposed to certain things, and we come together, we have a different outlook on what that should really be.
Right.
All with the same words and the same language.
Right, all with the same words, and so, yeah, so what this is, again, not clear. I think there could be a chance that speaking of, that there's a group thing going on that God wants not to happen. Jonathan Haidt, this great professor who writes on a lot of different things, including like social media issues and campus issues, recently used the Tower of Babel as a frame in an otherwise academic article in terms of sort of like enforced thought patterns on university campuses, using that the tower story is designed saying that everyone thinking the same way is not good for us, and the internet and Twitter, like sort of like for people who live in that world, like sort of enforces people thinking in the same way because you don't want to step out of line, right? So.
But ultimately, that has done to create more animosity, jealousy, insecurity, and so it creates hatred.
Yeah.
And leads to violence, because you guys are sitting over there, I don't know what you're saying, you're gonna talk about me. That's a problem.
Right, these cultural differences and linguistic differences, like that's why you got borders, that's why you got countries, that's why you got wars. Like sort of like all these things come out of that. but I want to say the author on some level must know this, right? Like that the fact of different languages and different cultures as part of what feeds violence and mistrust in the world. I think there's a chance that that was viewed as the better option. And almost, right, God, yeah, that God doesn't know it, yeah. So could, yeah.
We already know that.
Though there's not an unforeseen, right,
Kind of basic, like, why don't we all speak the same language as the world? If we're all wired the same. People who study linguistics will say it had to do with geographic differences, tribal differences. But, well, maybe. I'm not quite sure what the Bible is really trying to say, but I've often thought why we all don't speak the same language.
right,
Why do people speak differently?
right, so
Slang does develop.
slang that, right, so there's that, but that's not it, like there's that, sort of just generational thing where what's bad means bad to you, but bad might mean good to the kids say listening to Michael Jackson, which is 40 years ago, but whatever. Right. That's the basic etiology of this, which is like sort of like it explains that like sort of like simple fact of human life. But there's also like this, but there's also presumably maybe more going on. But yes, at the very least, it's that it's explaining all of this. Yeah. Fox.
It's my interpretation is what he's saying, is that it's something like the checks and balances system, right? That it's a brilliant example of biblical justice, a statement about a worldview in which the laws of justice and morality are as neatly balanced as we like to think the laws of nature are. So by having all these people speaking different languages, they have a check and balance against each other. Whereas if we all speak the same thing, it's more like a gang type of mentality.
And that, right, which brings us back to the internet essentially like helping reverse this trend in a certain sense, or as much as has ever been the case since the day of the Tower of Babel, the internet allows for this. Yes, so it could be that I think that's an actual possibility, that that again, different perspectives, despite all the negatives of it, are part of the game.
I think the negatives outweigh the positive.
I could be,
I think that the distances between people is what helped create not only languages, but accents, which led to language. An example, TV kind of killed the regional accents in the United States. You could tell somebody from Boston, somebody from Chicago, somebody from the South. When you're driving in the South, when I was a kid, my father has to cop the record, we didn't understand a word.
right.
And that's how,
Right.
with television.
Right.
That's gone.
Right, yeah, that's it, right, that there's a flattening out of these things, so that definitely could be the case, so all that could be the case.
What this does take into account is that there is some necessity for universal language at times. For example, every pilot has to speak English.
Right, everybody, right now, right, right, air control is always in English, no matter what, correct.
That's right.
So that one other aspect of what's going on is possibly like, what are they doing wrong? The immediate preceding story, the immediate important preceding story is the flood. After the flood, God says, I'm never flooding the earth again, don't worry about it. And then this next generation, they get together, and what's the one thing they're going to build? Why are they building the tower? For the flood. They don't trust God's promise not to flood the earth again. So one possibility is also this, is that it's like, oh, wait a minute, there's a not subtle, they don't trust me thing going on. Like, what's God upset about? That they're looking to do this, that the tower is, they're the reason it's a tower.
The first says, the whole earth was of one language,
Mhm.
one speech. Yet the end of chapter 10. Says,
Right.
these are the sons of the and they're tongues.
Right, exactly.
I think they're saying that people are scattered and they're different languages. Now that all of a sudden they're coming to this saying. This is
Correct. And if you looked, I just like zipped through it, but in chapter 10, they kept saying, they kept mixing together location, ethnic group essentially, and language, that those three things like throughout chapter 10. Yes. So it doesn't quite map perfectly. It doesn't quite map perfectly. You know, if you wanted to be creative about it, you say, oh, like air traffic control, it's just their second language. But yes, but somehow everyone understood each other. There's some primordial Esperanto. All the earth, one language, one speech. They go to Shinar, which is Babylon, and literally again they said, each man to his neighbor, come, let us make bricks. Literally, let's brick bricks. The Hava, the come let us make is the same phrase that God says with regard to humans. Come let us make, and again uses earth to make life. Here they're baking bricks, which are dead, right? It's not a living thing, and piling up. Many commentators think that this is partly a polemic against urbanization. That one of the things you find in the Bible is a anti-urban bias and a pro-rural bias. The heroes of the Bible are guys like King David. What was King David's profession before he's king? Shepherd. There's guys like Moses. What's Moses doing when he encounters the burning bush? Shepherd. Or Jacob. What's Jacob doing? Like working even for his uncle Lavan? Shepherd. They're all outside of the urban milieu. Because what happens when you go to the city? Corruption.
Things don't change.
Correct. This is right. It's still the same thing. The Bible may be very specifically mounting a polemic against urbanization. These guys are building a great city, and they're no good nicks. Cain built a city. The first city. Israelites are rural people. They're shepherds. Egypt is made up of cities. It's a technologically superior civilization. Babylon is a technologically superior civilization to Israel, and it seems that the city is emblematic of that. So throughout there is a suspicion of what urban life does, and again, maybe it doesn't change.
Mao said that exact thing, and he was far from believing the Bible.
Correct.
But I guess this comes from somewhere else too, this whole thought that urban life, rural life is more pure.
Correct. And urban life leads to greater corruption, which again is somewhat ironic because throughout the course of human history, as it would turn out, the urban people par excellence is going to be the Jews, who will become super urbanized. And again, that's part of that early Zionist project was to try and reverse that, oh, we're too urban and we need to go back and work the land and create a new Jew. And that new Jew will be farmer, and he's going to work on the kibbutz, and there's going to be so like all of that is in there. So there's an irony to it that I think the Bible does have a pro-rural, anti-urban perspective, and the people it's going to create will be the urban people. So Leon Kass on Tower of Babel writes, The city, every city, is a thoroughly human institution with settled place and defined boundaries, whose internal plan and visible structures all manifest the presence of human reason and artfulness, right? As opposed to seeing natural vistas, right? The city affirms man's effort to provide for his own safety and needs strictly on his own. Standing up against the given world, it affirms man's ability to control and master the given world, at least to some extent. Although the city stands as a memorial to the ingenuity and success of those who have gone before, at any given moment, the city is an expression of the human effort at self-sufficiency, at satisfying by human means alone all the needs and wants of human life. Born in need, the human city, by meeting and more than meeting the needs of its builders, proudly celebrates the powers of human reason. And the Bible wants to say, reason is nice, but you also need a sense of the divine. You can't build to the heavens, you have to look to that.
Really developed for protection.
I mean, in part,
Cities that, yeah.
like, because you can build right, you can defend it. Right. Right. So among other things, so you do it to try and provide for your own needs. It's less a right. Security is absolutely a need.
People still have free choice, right?
It was strictly defense.
Yeah, but you only defend yourself against other cities.
Kings.
Whoever.
The farmers aren't attacking anybody.
The kings.
They're being in the next city, once this city to be part of his land.
Yeah.
Right. And by the way, the tower is part of that security thing. The tower is both a protection from the flood, if you want to read it in the context of this story. The rabbis, Rashi will read this as that it's a tower up to the heavens, right? That they want to go up to heaven, and Rashi says they're gonna storm heaven and take it over. That this is it's like a siege works of putting a ladder up there that they want to storm the heavens and take over, and that's why God gets upset that it's a direct challenge. But it's also in Babylon, ziggurats, which is what this may be actually referring to, are religious structures, right? You can they exist in Babylon, they exist in Mesoamerican areas, right? Of large four-sided towers that are used for religious rituals, like where you'd be up closer to the heavens. So they had them in Babylon, it's probably what this is describing, and very similar designs in Aztec areas. It serves like a religious purpose as well. There's one other thing here that we're in these few words that we have. They say, come on, let's make bricks and fire them. And they had brick for stone, they had bitumen for mortar, and they said, come on, let's build ourselves a city and a tower. On top of it will be in the heavens, and we'll make ourselves a name, or else we'll scatter over the face of the earth. They state a purpose, and the purpose is to create for themselves a name. What does it mean to make a name for yourself? Yeah, it's like there's not many clues here, so we got to go with what we got. So that also seems to be part of it. The cast picks up that even Cain, when Cain moved to a city or built a city, he named it after his son. These guys want a name for themselves, so they're not even on some level looking to the next generation, but they're.
What name did they?
This is the thing. This is what we got. There's so few words here. There's so few words. So we don't know. But it seems that whatever it is, there's some sort of self-centered desire that's present. It's a super short story. Well,
Sometimes there's so much detail and sometimes there's not.
Why did I just get, yeah, why did I get all these words on begat, begat, begat?
Yeah.
And then here, where I want a few close-ups, it's 10 lines start to finish. So either it just wants to move on to the next thing, or everyone already knew it and you only needed a few bullet points. Or it's leaving it for, again, these are the midrashic openings. It leaves it for you to fill in the blanks. What would it be that every generation says, what is the action that would get God to be angry? And then you can, like, this is the religion angle on it. Then you can answer that being like, oh, maybe they're too self-centered. They wanted to build a name for themselves, but they weren't concerned about others. The rabbis will say when it says let's burn bricks, they would say that they burned bricks, and that they would that if a person got his hand caught in the brick burning machine, they were so fixated on making bricks and building up high, they didn't care that if you lost a hand, your hand's getting, then you lost your hand. We're moving on. Or if somebody, when building fell off the tower, that they're like, well, that's just the cost of doing business. We're building up the tower. And then essentially the rabbis all but say this is that the sin is an OSHA sin, that these aren't safe working conditions. They were too focused on their project and not focused on caring for other people. That's why God comes down and says, this is not okay. So from that point of view, it's like, oh, well, what's like they're reading it. What's the sin? The sin is not caring for human beings in the workplace. And that was the rabbi's response. That might have been like in response to what's going on at their time.
I think the Tower of Babel story is so well known. That's something that most people know.
It's so weird. Well, we started talking about this with like Noah, that like the beginning of the Noah story is super famous. In the end, not so much.
Yeah. I wouldn't be able to vote in my baby's for.
I don't know, other than in pre-modern times, I think that it did serve as a way to explain why people had different languages. How, if we all come from common ancestors, do we have different languages? And they're not going to say, well, you know, when you move somewhere, you get an accent, things like that. It's like, oh, because languages sometimes are similar from Spanish to Italian, and sometimes they're super different from Hungarian to everything else. So, yeah, so I think that might be part of it. But it is weird how this is the famous story, and there's nothing there. Cass also throws out an idea. Human unity depends on linguistic unity. The trouble lies not in the mere fact that all human beings speak a particular language, say Sumerian, but in the fact that the unified human language stands for and bespeaks merely a humanly constructed vision of the world and carries a purely factitious truth. It also lies in the pride that human beings take in the plots and projects for perfecting the world that are made possible by imagination furnished by the shared representations of uniform language. This is a different experience. That because shared language gives them a shared experience, there's not enough diversity in experience for them to be what they're supposed to be. The emergence of multiple nations with their divergent customs and competing interests challenges the view of human self-sufficiency. Each nation, by its very existence, testifies against the godlike status of every other. The rivalries that spring up are in part both the result of and the cause of the affronts to national self-esteem that such otherness necessarily implies. This is why you travel, in part. You travel in part to see things different from how you experience them day to day. I don't know, I went to the eye doctor the other day because I have trouble seeing. And he said, oh, we went to Japan. It was incredible just to see the different ways they do things. Right. And it was clear, like his mind was blown, which exists in part because they were able to set up like their own society so separate from everything else. Right. So, and that we learn when we encounter something super different from what we're used to. And an idea and a perspective that's different from what we're used to and that we probably don't like because it's weird and different. And it's only in confronting that you really grow, right? Like when you have to defend your opinions against somebody who truly disagrees, you're going to come up with a better defense of your own opinions because you encountered somebody who disagrees. That's made possible in part through this. So partly it could be that human beings can and should be sharpened by encounters with difference. Opposition is a key discovery of the distinction between error and truth. This, and remember, same thing at creation. With Adam, before Lilith possibly, it is not good for man to be alone, right? He needs an ezer kenegdo, possibly either a helpmeet opposite him or a strength corresponding to him, right? Like something like you need difference. Otherwise you get stuck in your own head. So all of this is the story of Babel. And what's going to follow, there's going to be a few begats, and then you get to Abraham. So like this is the position of difference that God tried dealing with everybody at once, and it didn't work. God tried Adam and Eve. You should just follow your heart and know the right thing, and it didn't work. And then with the generation of the flood, that they should after Cain and Abel, that you should just find that doing the right thing should be within you, and it wasn't. And then after the flood, he says just have a few laws and maybe it'll be okay. And it wasn't. Noah passes out drunk and naked, and people build a tower for which there seems to be some terrible sin implicit in it. And then God's like, all right, I'm not going to try and deal with all of humanity at once. I'm going to start over with one family. And from now on, instead of teaching everyone at once, it's going to be a small group project and talk to one family. And that's the next step. Adkan. Next week, Shavuot, because today's the 42nd day of the Omer, which means that a week from tonight is Shavuot. So it'll be at the same time, but a different setup with etc. 2 weeks, yeah.
On Thursday.